Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Maseches Shekalim. A couple of interesting ha'aras about Shekalim. First of all, Shekalim talks about the donations given to the Beis Hamikdash, so it probably would have been more appropriate to have put it in Seder Gachim, which talks about the Karbanos. What in the world is it doing in Moed, which talks about Moadim? So the Meiri in Brachos, his introduction, actually asks this question, and he suggests two explanations that actually help us understand the Mishnah better. The first explanation, he says, is that since this was given annually, it's based on a calendar. So therefore it has a lot to do with Moed, which means time. So Shabbos, Erevim, Sachim, Shekalim, Jalav, Yom Tovim, that arrive. So that's very, very important. Also, he says that the whole purpose of the funding of the Shekalim was in order to pay for the karbanos that are brought on the Yom Tovim. So again, it's very shaykh to Yom Tov. The question is, so why is it put specifically here? Shabbos, Erevim, Sachim, Shekalim. Why is it put here? So the Srei Ragon, which is quoted by Tosas Yontif, says that it's because since the time allotment for giving the shekel was in the month of Adar, which is right before Pesach, so therefore it was juxtaposed right to Pesach. But then you would say, but then it should come before Pesach. I think that Shabbos, Erevim, Pesachim are very, very related. For example, you find that Haman complained to Achashverosh that they always say Shabbos Hayom, Pesach Hayom. The idea of Shabbos is Zecher Yisrael, and Pesach is also Zecher Yisrael. So the next appropriate place to put it, not to interrupt between Shabbos, Erevim, and Pesachim, which is very, very related, is going to be putting it over here. There's another problem, which is why is it called Shekalim? You have to give a shekel, or a half shekel, actually. So what's Shekalim? So, first of all, since the Masechta actually talks about the payment of donations to the Beis Hamikdash, so it actually represents just general donations. So Shekalim actually just represents the multiple donations that were given. But I think there's something deeper, and that is that, remember, the whole point of the Machzah shekel is to show that each person is not complete without another Jew making him complete, and that we're part of a nation. So Shekalim actually shows that we're looking for the completion of a nation, not just shekel for each individual. No, Shekalim, we're looking for the collective donations. I'm not going to talk so much about this because I already covered it, but I just want to mention it, that Shekalim is probably one of the most famous Masechtas of Yerushalmi, and that's because in the first cycle of Daf Yomi, led by Rameir Shapiro, who unfortunately only lived to one siyum and passed away very, very young before any other siyum could take place. So they had a question as to whether they should learn Shekalim or not. Why? Because there's no Bavli on Shekalim. So they learn through Brachos, then they skip to Shabbos, Erevim, Pesachim, and then the question is, now what? Do you skip Shekalim or not? So this is part of a controversy of the Bomberg Shas actually included Shekalim. The Bomberg Shas actually printed a later version of Yerushalmi and has a different girsa in the Shekalim, etc., which is a whole problem in itself, in length versus the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and even how many days. If you're using the old Vilna print of the Yerushalmi version, you're going to be very confused because the Vilna print and the Bavli version has a different paginization. Here today, we're going to be using the Os 100 print, which instead of being around 11 blot later is actually going to put us in at about 61 days. So we're going to go through it slowly. There's a lot of interesting things to go through, and that's the way to learn Yerushalmi, slowly and well. Anyway, so that's a very, very famous controversy. I want to start off saying that the psukim that talk about Shekalim are Shemos Lamed, Vaydaber Shalom Moshe Lemar, Kisi Sas Rosh Yisrael of Kudam, V'Nastu Ish Kofer Nafsho Hashem of Kodasam V'Yevachem Negev of Kodasam. You might recognize this from Shabbos Parsha Shekalim. Zeh Gitnu Kol Over Al Pkudim Machzah Shekel B'Shekel HaKodesh. Okay, and that is it, and that's what he gives. So there's a very famous thing that the Gra brings down, that V'Nasnu, that the pasuk V'Nasnu is all about giving and being generous. And so what the Gra says is a very, very famous vart that about Shekalim that you're probably familiar with, that Machzis HaShekel is Mem Ches Tzadi Yud Taf. So it has a tzadi in the middle, which is the word tzedakah, and it has the letters Ches Yud Chai, which means life, which are right next to the tzedakah, because tzedakah is Matzil Mavis, and then it has a Mem and Taf, which is mace, which is death. So the Gra says that when a person gives tzedakah, it saves them from death, which is a beautiful remez. So the kasha is that, wait a minute, and I heard this from Chaim Kosman of Ner Yisrael, Baum Kasha, that wait a minute, the Masa Shekel is going to the Beis Hamikdash for the Karbanos. It has nothing to do with tzedakah. It's a good vart, and it's a very Yisodistic thing. What's going on? There's another interesting thing also, which is that the Gra himself, on these psukim of Masa Shekel, here is that. the Grana Deras Elio on that pasuk actually says that this refers to donating for the construction of the Mishkan, and the mitzvah of giving the half shekel is actually Lachal Moshe Sinai, and it's not even in this pasuk itself, but it doesn't change anything, perhaps. But so I want to give 3 answers to this question. 2 of them I heard from Ray Cosman after I Baruch Shekivanti, and the third one, I don't know if you would be moskim to it or not, but I think that it's a good answer. So one answer is that in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, in the original giving, there was no tzedakah to give because everybody was rich. When they went out of Egypt, they had all unlimited wealth. So therefore, it wasn't shy to give tzedakah. So the closest thing to tzedakah was supporting the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. I don't agree with that. I don't think that explains it. The second answer is what I think is correct, and the third answer is also, I think, correct. The second answer is that the Beis Hamikdash itself, the karbanos are the greatest way to be mechaper on Klal Yisrael. This whole idea is that we want to have a portion in the communal, carbon, the carbon talmud, etc., and all the other sacrifices. That's why it was so important to give. So Mamela, the ultimate chesed is when we give money to the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore we're able to bring the karbanos. For example, Chazal say that the Goyim benefited tremendously from the 70 parim that were given for the 70 nations throughout Sukkot. And there's even a medrash that says that had the Goyim known how much the Beis Hamikdash did for them, they would have surrounded it and refused to let it gotten destroyed. So the destruction of Beis Hamikdash wreaked havoc in the world. And the Beis Hamikdash itself brings shalom between us and Hashem, and it brings down bracha. So it is the ultimate tzedakah. And that, I believe, is the emes l'mita shel davar, and what the Grub is referring to. But I think there's something even more important, even more pashut, which should be said, and that is that the Yerushalmi says, in the Ozvahadar print, it is on Daf Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph, and also the Bavli and Ksubas Daf Kuf Vav says the same thing, and the Rambam brings it down Hilchos Shekalim, which is that the money that was used for the Shekalim actually paid for wages of Talmidei Chachamim who taught the Kohanim how to perform the avodah. So Mamela, you see that is tzedakah. That is tzedakah. The greatest tzedakah is supporting Talmidei Chachamim that can learn. So Mamela, there actually was tzedakah in the Machzor Shekel. So the whole question doesn't even start. And even if it does start, we've answered it with at least one or maybe even 2 other good answers. But anyway, that's an interesting thing to talk about. So I wanted to share that. Just a quick thing that the Shekalim actually were given to people. It's not just a chiyuv of people living in Eretz Yisrael. It was a chiyuv of people in Chutz La'aretz as well, because the karbanos were brought for them, and that was very relevant. And that's where the whole kalbun comes in, which is the exchange rate, and we'll talk about that, Be'ez Hashem, when we get to it. Okay. The Mishnah tells us, the first Mishnah on Daf Aleph, remember we talked about the Yerushalmi starts on Daf Aleph, so it talks about Osin Kol Tzarech HaRabim Mitzaynin Al Esakvaros V'Yotzin Af Al Kalayim. So they get rid of the Kalayim as well. So again, we see that at the first day of Adar, which is why we use that time of year to talk about the Shekalim, that's what they do. Mashmin al Shekalim v'al Kalayim. So what I wanted to suggest was the following, which is a question as to why we focus on Kalayim and Shekalim at the same time. So I wanted to say like this, that the whole idea of Shekalim is that each individual makes a difference and each individual is important. And the whole idea of Kalayim is erasing the individuality of people. Kalayim represents the idea that God created each min to be its own, like the Chinuch says, Sefer Chinuch. And we're coming and overriding that, and we're saying, no, I have a better idea. I'm going to mix these. So the two are very intrinsically related. And I thought that was an interesting idea just as we're learning through this. And one last thing, which I should have mentioned earlier, but this learning should be a zechus for the neshama of my dear friend's mother, Mrs. Shelach Tzibor, Allah Shalom, Tzipora Bat Yaakov. Okay, this applies for all of our learning, and specifically Mesechus Shekalim as well. Okay, and then the Gemara says later on that how do I know when the drawing takes place of a new Shekalim? The pasuk says, "Vayhi b'chodesh harishon b'shana hashenis b'echad l'chodesh hukam ha'mishkan." So it's very fascinating that the Mishkan itself was completed then. So Mamela, it became engraved in that time period that this was a time to, even though it's a historical event, but since that was the time the Beis Hamikdash being hukam, it became nigzar that at that time that's when they do it in the Beis Hamikdash. And again, it's a nod to that time of the Mishkan, that's when we want to start the new year. And again, it reminds us just to think about the foundation of the Beis Hamikdash, etc. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that I'll call you tomorrow, but Asr. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, we'll say that for tomorrow. All right, thanks for joining, and Be'ez Hashem, we should be zocha to complete the Masechta together. Have a great day.